you were working as a first responder, you were a dispatch operator,
That's
and
correct.
I'd
Yes.
love to get that kind of background and also your background then into running and then, of course, into breathing. But let's just start off anyway with your role as a dispatch operator.
Yeah. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. And so I started in emergency communications back when I was 18 years old. So been in it for over 2 decades, which is kind of surprising for a lot of people to hear that I started when I was 18. It's not a very common thing to start that early. So I started working for a local helicopter air ambulance company called Stars Air Ambulance. It's a nonprofit organization based here in Canada. We kind of cover Western Canada. They covered Western Canada now, but when I first started, it was only two bases, which were in Calgary and Edmonton, kind of the two major cities in Alberta. Yeah, so I did work there for a better part of 12 years. Worked my way through kind of lower level positions all the way up to team lead positions within the dispatch center. And I like to say within that role, it's about you hear the worst of the worst. You're hearing the critically ill and injured calls for people that need air ambulance transports all the time. So it's about 90% critically ill and injured, and about 10% of the rest of the population. Yes, there might be some concerns there, but it's kind of that percentage back and forth with what you might be hearing.
And how many sort of calls would you get per day? Just your typical work day. Were you working days or were you working nights or shift, or what way did it work?
Yeah, so I did shift work for pretty much 16 years, 2 days, 2 nights, four on, four off, 12-hour shifts, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And then you get the 2 days of that, and then you would do the swing and you would do 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So you're constantly flopping your body every 4 days to do the work, which I mean, if you look at all the statistics and the research, it takes over 10 years off your life. It's actually on some research articles worse than smoking with that shift work pattern. And typically the call volume, when I first started, we weren't as busy, but I mean, you would typically get anywhere from 10 to 20 requests for the helicopters in a day. Now you're probably looking more like 30 to 40, maybe even more than that for some of my friends and things that are still work in those positions. It's quite busy. It's a lot of logistics, a lot of planning, a lot of coordination. It was really just making sure that the helicopter was able to get to where they needed to go and get the patient back to care as fast as they possibly could in the safest way that they could.
So it's very responsible. So you're taking in the information from the person who's calling it in, and you're relaying this information then to the pilots and
Yeah, so
directing
we
them
actually
to the
had
scene.
Yeah, we essentially ran consults. So our job was to do the coordination of bringing all of the doctors together. So we had our transport physicians, we had receiving physicians, we had sending physicians. Everybody was brought onto one call. It was kind of like one call does it all, one stop shop. Everybody phones in, gets on a big consult, decides what's the best mode of transport, and then our job is to provide what those details are, the flight times, get the pilots to check weather, get the pilots to accept the mission. They can accept it based on the weather and the conditions, give the times, and then the transport physician decides what the best mode of transport is, whether it's an airplane, whether it's the helicopter, or whether it was ground at the time. And they ultimately get to make that call based on the information that I'm providing, and then I do flight tracking of the helicopter to and from.
Because I just have to think, Evan, I suppose for people who are not, it's only when I talk to you now that I kind of get a sense of what's going on. Um, for somebody in a role like that, for it to affect their mental health, because normally what a person might say, well, you're just answering calls, and I'm just putting that into inverted commas. But there's so much going on. You were literally the relayer or the manager of this scene. So you could be very much exposed to trauma, and you are exposed to trauma. I know that was part of your background. How did you know that you were feeling trauma? What did you feel? What was the initial? Did you just override it? What symptoms did you have?
So I think the unique thing is coming into a role like this when you're 18 years old, your brain's not really developed until you're as a male until you're about 26 years old. So I quite literally grew up with trauma, not realizing how it was affecting me. I was always the person that people could rely on, calm, cool under pressure, responded very well. later in my career, when I moved over to our local 911 dispatch for EMS and fire, that's when things started hitting a little bit harder because we were actually taking calls from the public. Whereas when I worked at Stars, we were taking calls from all the dispatch and 911 centers in the hospitals. So I wasn't as exposed one on one to that immediate reaction. And I think that's the unique part about that role is I didn't realize how much I was taking on at that time. And realistically, now knowing the best way to describe it is for those that understand kind of the fight or flight system. I was in fight or flight all the time. That was my baseline. My baseline was fight or flight. And it looked like I was having it all together because I could be calm, cool under pressure, but I was had to always be on because you never knew what was going to be coming through that phone. It could be a missed call, it could be a wrong number, or it could be the worst call that you've ever taken in your career. And you had to be the one that they relied on to get the help to them or provide them the help that they needed. So that was really the catalyst for it is always understanding that being in fight or flight all the time is not sustainable. And I think that was the biggest cue for me that I started realizing after moving over to the 911 position, which we can talk about.
So in terms of fight or flight, though, like we can all be in a certain amount of stress, but we won't recognize it. Where you gave a chart to help say that's where you are. I know I'm only referring to there's something what's called the Combat Operational Stress Code, where it was initially brought out in the US Marines, so that Marines had an idea of whether they were in green, yellow, orange, or red. Did you have something like, how do you identify that you're in that place? I'm just thinking about a listener who might be listening in, feeling wound up, but not sure if they're in fight or flight response. How do you know if we're stressed? Or how did you know that you were stressed?
Yeah, I mean, I can say for that time of my career, I unconsciously had no idea that I was stressed at all because my baseline was there all the time and I didn't know any different. The way that I found out that I was stressed is during lockdowns and everything with when I was working at our local 911. I had been in that role for 3 to 4 years, and then I got a position that was now working from home for 2 years. And then I ended up going back into the environment shortly about a year and a half after that. And that's when I realized what my baseline from being at home versus my baseline from being in a dispatch center that like sights, sounds, radios, phone calls going off, lights going off for, overflow of calls, just the overstimulation and then being pulled out of that environment for a short period of time, well, long period of time, and then going back into it. That was when everything hit me like a ton of bricks and understanding like, oh wow, like I was like overstretched beyond what I ever thought I was in because I was just so in it all the time. And when you're in it, you can't see it.
And it's only when you're out of it that you can make a comparison to it. And interestingly, because I often feel a lot of people who go into running, they're not actually doing it necessarily for improving body, but they're doing it for improving mind. And was that was that your forte into running?
Yeah, so I've been trail running and trail running for about 20 years as well. When I first started, it was just more fun, competitive. I was very much like I want to get on a podium and beat people. And then it's interesting, my ultra running journey, any for those that are listening, ultra running is anything more than kind of that 50-kilometer distance and above. That coincided exactly with me moving over to that 911 position. And as I moved through that and unconsciously took on more trauma and more stress, my running distances increased. If I were to put them on a calendar, it was like this. And I didn't know that's what was happening and why I was doing it. And it was out of distraction and avoidance. It was swapping one thing for another. And I know that's very big in the endurance community that there is a lot of people who go through addiction and mental health and all these other pieces, whether it be alcohol or drugs or any of those pieces, and you swap one for the other. Running 160 kilometers a week, is that any healthier than drinking 5 times a day? You kind of sit there and wonder, like, is that the case? And for me, it was ultimately avoidance and distraction is what I realized when I eventually did ask for help and understood where it was coming from.
So your departure then from, well, you're still obviously as a runner, and then you came across the importance of nose breathing. And where I would love to find an interest in is in terms of running as a means of helping with mental health. And I assume that you were previously running with your mouth open because most people, 95.6% or 96.6% of people who run typically breathe through an open mouth. You then came across the oxygen advantage. When did you come across it?
Yeah, so I came across it probably, I would say, would have been about 2.5 to 3 years ago. And the reason why I kind of came across it was more in relation to the breath work and the tools that I was given within my PTSD healing. And I really gravitated towards those breathwork tools. And I was like, there's got to be something more out here. There's something missing. And I found Oxygen Advantage through that, and being able to use that to regulate myself, not only for my healing journey in PTSD and all the therapy that I've gone through, but also as a performance tool for running. So it's interesting. I really have used both sides of it personally, which also led me to doing the instructor certification, which I'm nearly finished, just waiting for my case studies to finish up here. So I think that's the unique thing is I've used both sides of it. I've used it from a therapeutic side and I've used it from a performance side. And I think that's the unique kind of spot that I sit in now. I think if I don't know of many people that have done it for both, in talking to a few people. So I think I come at it from a very unique angle.
And in terms of, so for maybe I should have backtracked a little bit there because with PTSD, you were going to therapy, but you were also introduced to breathing practice. What sort of breathing exercises were they? Hyperventilation? Were they breath holds or slow breathing, or what was the typical instruction?
Yeah, the typical instruction is your typical box breathing, with, small breath holds at the top, small breath holds at the bottom. There was, some elements of like tapping and, hand on chest and really just like very like conscious centered breathing of just like feeling your belly rise, feeling your chest rise. But the interesting thing is a lot of those tools always talked about like take a deep breath, take like breathe deeply. And, the oxygen advantage, as we know, it's like the light breathing, especially when you realize that your body was in a constant fight or flight for such a long time. Like the deep breathing is just going to bring you further up here, whereas the light breathing just brings you down to the point of regulation. That's the best way to describe it when it comes to the mental health side of things, and allows you to process things in a very, very different way.
Yeah, so this is the thing about breathing, and it can be confusing for a lot of people. So I always think the intention of when somebody says to take a deep breath, their intention is good, but it's often how it's relayed to the student that it gets a little bit confusing. If we were, say, breathing in and out through the nose with lateral expansion and contraction of the lower ribs, we are effectively deep breathing, but we're not taking full big breaths because full big breaths is not necessarily what you want to do if you're already chronically overbreathing, because all we're doing is adding overbreathing on top of overbreathing. But at the same time, it helps you. And probably because it was getting your attention out of your head that you weren't overthinking. Do you think you were an overthinker?
I mean, I'm overthinking right now. I mean, it's one of those things that it's been always there for me because I'm a very analytical person. And with the roles that I've done, your job is to be in control all of the time. You need to know where the pieces are moving and what's going on. So it was very much a control piece as well as that overthinking side of things. And when you say like get out of your head and into your body, like that's what running is for me. It's very much like getting it, and the breathing aspect, if you tie that into it too, and that becomes your everyday breathing, I think that's the unique thing. It's like I hear a lot of people talking about like, oh, I went out for a nose breathing run. I said, okay, that's great. Like, I love that that's what you're doing. But what is your everyday breathing? If your everyday breathing is breathing out of your mouth, well, you're not giving yourself a benefit. So I think that's the unique thing here is like I can give you all of the information and say, go and do this. But that's where these instructors and coaching and all these other pieces come in that I think breath work is, as we've talked about before, and I've heard you talk about, is it's it's coming up now and it's becoming more conscious in people's minds. I mean, what's the one thing that everybody does that if you don't do it, you're not going to be here? Breathing. There's something to it that goes far beyond the actual, like, the act of, breathing in and out. There's a major mental health piece. There's a major performance piece, and I think we're just at that, like, precipice of what is possible with it. I think it's unique coming into it when I'm coming into it right now, because mental health is being talked about so much, because breathing is now being talked about so much. There's a unique opportunity to share that knowledge with people and have them, really change their lives. And I think that's the amazing part about it.
I agree with you. Um, and I would also say that inability to switch off the mind at so many people, and I think I don't just think about, I was one of those individuals as well, and I wasn't in a role that you had. So I can only imagine the amplification that if one is in a stressful role and the trauma associated with that, what it does do to the mind. And we're not taught how to switch off the mind. And with breathing, it is a gateway, but also by changing breathing patterns, that we help to bring a balance to the autonomic nervous system. And, box breathing that you were taught, it does that to some degree. So yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Your timing is good as an oxygen advantage and structure. I really do see that there's going to be very specific breathing techniques going into the world of mental health, and a realization for psychotherapists and for psychologists to go beyond the instruction of taking a deep breath, because that doesn't really mean anything. It's kind of just a fraction of a percent in terms of the realm of what we could do out of breathing. So you came across breathing with your PTSD. Your mind was always thinking. You practice breathing exercises. Did it help you quieten the mind to some degree? And if I was to ask you a figure, how much or what percent do you feel that your mind might have quietened from practicing breathing?
Yeah, I think the unique thing is with going into therapy after I got the diagnosis of PTSD, it took me about a solid 3 months to really get out of my own head and into my body. To the way I describe it is, in my roles that I did, I taught myself how not to feel. So I couldn't even feel the emotions and the feelings in my body of the trauma that was sitting there, because I was so in my head, I couldn't actually get there. Now, as soon as I instituted some of the breathing techniques, whether that be the box breathing and then getting into the oxygen advantage pieces, that's when things really started to open up. And when I say, like, it was easier to process things, it's because I could get out of my head and not sit there, and I could really focus on my breath and be the big one. The bigger piece of this is the presence that it creates for you. Like, if you are focusing on your breathing, you can't be anywhere else. You are here. Like, your breath is here, you are here. There's no, and that's not, we talk about with oxygen advantage, not trying to be, it's not, woo woo breath work. It's like, but it's true. Like, you can't be anywhere else. If you're focused on your breathing, you're actually intentionally there, you can't be anywhere else. So that forces you to get out of your mind and into your body and into what you're feeling. So, I mean, it changed everything for me. Like, percentage wise, if I had to say what I was walking into before I did breath work, I would probably say like a 60 to 70% change if I had to throw a number at it. I mean, numbers are all, like, everybody can talk about numbers, but it's how I felt more than anything. Like, numbers are very subjective, but the actual feeling that I felt, in order to be able to open up to actually work on the healing and process things, it just changed everything.
Yeah, and like it's not an easy path in terms of, I assume that when you first started taking your attention out of your head and onto your breathing, there's always a tendency for the mind to want to stay boss, that the mind wants to stay in control. And how was that for you? Were you pretty determined, or maybe you were just fed up of living in your head and you knew intuitively that there was another way to do it? Or how was that? Just the initial, because think of somebody who is new to maybe bringing breathing and going beyond, say, mindfulness. What would they expect to experience? Did you fall off the wagon? Did you get fed up at any time? That
Oh
journey.
yeah, yeah, it was a yo-yo. That's the best way to describe it. It was very up and down, but I was very committed to my own healing because I knew that I couldn't do it alone. And I think that's the unique thing is so many people think that they have to do that healing and that work alone. And it's not the case. You know, we all think that we're alone. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, all these things, like those symptoms and those diagnoses, like they want us alone. They want us isolated. It wants us by ourselves. So being able to really get into the therapy and get out of your mind and really quiet the mind was, I mean, the most important thing for me was that. And I think, for people just coming into using breath work and what they can expect, I think if you go into it thinking that this is like going to help you, it's that I don't want to say positive mindset. It's that neutral mindset. I'm really kind of big into that. It's not negative. It's not positive. It's like I'm really coming into it with you know what, my intentions are here. I'm present. Like I'm neutral and I'm open to the process. If you're not open to it, you're going to put this like, barrier up, oh man, like breath work, this is so ridiculous. Like, why am I doing this? But if you can go into it with an open mind and really just like immerse yourself in it and really find that place of acceptance, whether it be the mental health side or the breathwork piece, like I think those two things for me kind of went hand in hand is that acceptance piece and that surrender of, okay, like I'm willing to try something here because what I've been doing hasn't been working. So what do I have to lose? And I think that's the big piece is that openness to it.
Yeah, I like what you say there, that you focused on the process. In other words, you didn't set an expectation because we're here, when we set a goal, we're here, but we want to be over there. In other words, we're not happy with where we are at. We want to achieve something here in the future, but automatically then the mind is projected into the future. So basically, you said to yourself, I'm going to give this a go. I'm going to bring my attention onto my breathing. There's no expectations, there's no outcomes. In actual fact, the goal is the act of the doing in the process, and that's where everything
Mm-hmm.
is. And there's a bit of frustration, and that's normal. And then you just gently play with it, gently work with it. So over a period of time, you then brought breathing into your life and then breathing into your running. How was it when you first started running with your mouth closed? Do you remember the first day?
I can remember why. So if there was a couple of races where I definitely was mouth breathing because I actually burned the back of my throat during a hot race, and I like could barely talk for 2 or 3 days afterwards. My lips were completely dry, like chapped lips, everything. I still remember those feelings and what that felt like. But getting nose breathing and nasal breathing into my running, it's interesting. My coach and mentor Ray Zahab, he's a fairly well known ultra runner and expedition guy in Canada. He's done like crazy Baffin Island crossings, Atacama Desert, North Pole, you name it, he's done it. And he's been doing nose breathing for like decades. And when he agreed to coach me, I was already kind of getting into it. And he's like, that's great. Let's keep going with it. And it was, it was so hard at first, I will say. Like, I mean, I was running, to put numbers to it, I was running at best 7 to 7:15 minute per kilometer nose breathing. And I was still getting tired. And that was when I first started. And I was like, okay, I'm committed to this. I know it's going to work. And I talking to my coach, reading Oxygen Advantage, and going through the exercises myself. And this was prior to me even thinking about becoming an instructor. I was really just like, okay, I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to do the daily exercises. I'm going to do the nose breathing on the majority of my runs whenever I can, unless I'm, doing some sprinting. And I went from, in a period of about, I would say, 8 to 10 months, I went from 7:15 minute kilometers. I can now comfortably hold nose breathing runs at anywhere from about 4:45 to 5 minute kilometers pretty consistently for as long as I need to run. Um, as long as I'm maintaining the cadence and everything with the breathing. So it's, I mean, to make almost a 2 minute and 30-second kilometer difference in 8 to 10 months, like it doesn't seem like a lot for some people, but I've just like hacked my body to using oxygen faster. I don't cramp anymore. Like that's probably been the biggest one for me. I used to build up so much lactic acid in my legs. I don't cramp at all anymore. And that's like mind blowing to me because that was used to be the thing that would take me out of my ultra races when I first started was cramps. And that's the only thing I really changed. I still kept my electrolytes, everything in check, and really breathing. It's kind of been this like I have all these other things dialed in now, and I'm going to change one thing so I don't have all these variables that are competing with one another. So I'm only going to change my breathing, but I'm going to keep everything else the same. So it allowed me to really see the difference rather than changing everything all at once.
And did you slow down initially?
Oh, for sure, without
Yeah.
a doubt. It wasn't so much the slowing down. I couldn't run as far initially. I think that's the thing. I would still keep the pace, and I'd be like, oh, I got to switch to at least breathing out of my mouth at least once. And I mean, when I say like 4:45, 5 minute kilometers, that's flat. Obviously, throw hills in there, it changes things a little bit, but that's kind of like my flat paces and the differences that have changed, which is absolutely incredible.
Which, it's a good point because I think a lot of people might be put off introducing nose breathing during running because they're thinking, there's no way I'm going to do it. It's not possible to do it. Now, I'm just looking at your nose, and when I look at your nostrils, you have nice wide nostrils in comparison, say, to mine. So you would have a natural advantage because you have a better nasal airway, and you might have another runner with a small nasal airway, but they could use a nasal dilator to match that. And you were saying that, yes, you stuck with nasal breathing, but you weren't going to lose any diminishment in performance because you could still push yourself breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. So you were almost bringing nose breathing as adding an extra workload and causing the body to make adaptations. And then your body was adapting to that. And that's when all the good stuff happens. When you started noticing, for somebody to stick with it though for many months, how soon did you notice that there was something in it? Or did you just kind of have faith that you were, did you find it was faster recovery? When did you notice that the cramping was reducing, for example? Like those benefits in terms of your airways, the cramps, oxygen delivery, etc.
Yeah, interesting thing is I've had two sinus surgeries, so that's the other thing too. It's like I don't have this like naturally amazing nose that just does everything. I've had turbinate bones in the way and all kinds of stuff. Even still to this day, I got a little bit of a crook in my nose just from the surgery. So it's like I've had to really work at it. So I can empathize and sympathize with people who have injuries or have had surgeries who say like I can't do that. I'm proof that you can, even though it definitely they definitely gave me second thoughts about whether or not it would be the thing to do with having had the surgeries. But I think 1 to 2 months, I would say, that's if you can give yourself consistently 1 to 2 months. And when I say 1 to 2 months, I don't just mean only running nasal breathing. I mean actually doing the exercises because you want this to become unconscious. You want this to be your default breathing. You don't want to be going back to mouth breathing when you're not running just because you weren't doing the exercises. So it's really been intentional for me to get my everyday breathing to be the nose breathing. So when I am running, I don't even have to think about it anymore. It's not like I'm trying to be like, okay, breathe in through your nose. It's I do it and I only don't do it when I've exerted beyond my ability to do it. So I think that's what it is for me is really focusing on the everyday breathing.
And this is the key point. So what you're saying is that your breathing during running is determined by your breathing in your normal everyday life. And there's no point in just switching to nose breathing during running if you're going around the rest of the day with your mouth open and mouth open during sleep. Do you wake up with a dry mouth in the morning? Did you wake up with a dry mouth in the morning?
Oh yeah, it was a dry tongue, whatever. I haven't actually gone the route of mouth taping myself. I've really stuck to the nasal breathing aspect. I've still haven't tried the nasal dilators yet. I really want to. I've tried nasal strips. They just fall off, sweat.
Mm.
They don't work very well. I've seen these new ones now that have the little magnets. I don't know if you've seen those ones that have the
We have
magnet
them as
strips.
well in terms of the
Yeah.
things about the magnets is I like to have a product that you can just wash and you don't have to buy anything new. So
Hmm.
these are nasal dilators here. So basically it's a plastic device. Now this is our own one. So there's different ones on the market, but I think something like whether it's the magnets or whether it's a device that goes up into the nose. And basically, now this one is the large one that doesn't fit into my nose because my nose is totally compromised. So you would then bend it to achieve the degree of width that you want to get. And then you just wash it after every run. And that will last for about 6 months. They're inexpensive and they're based on the Cottle maneuver. Just do this for me. Put one finger here and one finger here and just gently prise your nostrils. Does it make any difference?
Oh yeah, it definitely makes a difference.
Okay, so
Yeah,
then a
for
nasal
sure.
dilator will help. So it will ease airflow because normally what scientists, when they're looking at when a person transitions from nose to mouth breathing, it's when they are breathing about 35 to 44 liters of air per minute. So this is when the intensity is probably in a zone 3 intensity. So anybody who's in zone 1, zone 2, zone 1, say warm up, zone 2, you can have a conversation during physical exercise. That should be nose. But if a person then is continuously nasal breathing during exercise, their body adapts to it. So their tolerance of carbon dioxide improves, the diaphragm becomes stronger, there's reduced breathlessness, they don't need so much air during physical exercise, and then they can go into zone 3 with nose. Do you look at it that way? In terms of how did you use heart rate as a determinant or time as a determinant of your, in terms of, did you calibrate your speed based on metrics or did you calibrate it based on perceived rate of exertion?
Yeah, so I used a little bit of both. So the time was just, me figuring out, oh, I can maintain this for a 30-minute run. That was really, they always talk about like, your zone 2 should be a 30-minute pace that you can maintain for the entire time is just a blanket average that I've heard in the past. I don't know if that's a firm number, but 30 minutes pace you can maintain is typically your zone 2 if it's pretty easy going. And then the other one is heart rate. That was the other one that I had used just purely to see, I'll give the example when I did my 200 miler race last September, my heart rate during that entire 94 hours. Now, obviously, I had some sleep in there. I had my heart rate monitor going on my wrists going all the time, which those aren't always as accurate as the chest. But on average, my heart rate for that entire 94 hours was 130 beats per minute across the entire board for the entire 200-mile event. So for me, I know where my zones are, and to be able to maintain that is incredible because I mean, I used to be, let's say, like 145, 150, somewhere in that range for that type of an event until I switched to nose breathing. So I can not only keep my heart rate down, which again means I use less oxygen, means I'm probably going to be sweating less. It means I'm not my rate of perceived exertion is much lower. All of these things, and really, I think nose breathing really lends itself to ultra running. It's maybe not so much in marathons where you're running flat out trying to get a 2.5 hour marathon, but with ultra running it's very much an endurance sport, and I think breathing, if you can be consistent with it, you can create this certain level of endurance where nothing affects you. Like I can keep my heart rate at 130 while everybody else is at 150, 160, and I can be still going up a hill. Maybe I might have to breathe out of my mouth a couple times when I'm going uphill just to be able to maintain it, but I can get back to it right away. So I think that's the unique thing for me is I'm not a huge data person, and I really go by feel, but I use those markers for me, the time and the heart rate, as the kind of leveling factor of like, where am I at? Because at least now I have something to measure it off of.
See, this is interesting because it's not, I think very often people think about it's the volume of air that you draw into your nose or mouth that's the key, but that's not the key. It's not the air that you're drawing in. You can actually breathe less air and still have increased oxygen delivery to the tissues. So when people think that I have to do all of my physical exercise with the mouth open so that I can breathe enough air to get enough oxygen delivery to the tissues, what you are saying is breathe through your nose, your body adapts to the reduced ventilation. You don't need so much air coming into the body. And because you're breathing through the nose, your tolerance of carbon dioxide is higher. And as a result, you will have higher CO2 in the blood during your physical exercise, which in turn is going to cause more oxygen to be delivered from the red blood cells to the tissues. So as a result, you're breathing less air, but it doesn't mean that you don't have sufficient oxygen getting to the working muscles. It is really about training the body to become more efficient, isn't it? It's about how do you become so efficient that you don't need so much ventilation, because there's an energy expended with breathing. Every time we breathe, or the harder and the faster we breathe, so much of our oxygen consumption is going to support our breathing muscles. But what you're saying is you're able to cover that distance of 200 miles with much more efficiency so that you're not wasting energy unnecessary. Yeah, it's really, so when you've had conversations about this with your peers in the running world. Now, your coach has helped because your coach knew about nose breathing, and there's not so many coaches that actually know. At least I don't feel there is, Like I've been talking about nose breathing. I wrote a book in 2003 called Close Your Mouth, and that was just at the very start of it. So how are your peers taking it when you talk about it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Just going back to so in March, I did the Speed Project. I don't know if you've heard of that race at all, but it's an ultra marathon. It's an unsanctioned race, and it goes from Los Angeles, Santa Monica Pier to Las Vegas. And it's just right around 300 miles, but you get to choose your own route. And the only reason I bring this up is because during that time, so that one was my longest event I've ever done, 290 miles or so. And my coach was very adamant with me. He's like, I don't want you talking to the people you're running with. I need you to focus on your breathing. Because anytime you're talking, you're releasing the CO2 out of your body and you're not creating the efficiencies in your body. So it's funny, Cassie, my partner, said to my crew, like, don't be surprised if he's not talking to you. Like, we can just move. He might say a few things. You can talk to him all you want, but he won't be talking. And it's just it's hard because you want to be a social and you want to talk to people, but you also understand that the performance benefits that come from it. So that was an interesting conversation. So when you talk about like my peers, I probably talk about it too much with my friends, and I really try not to go too deep into the science unless they're seeing an interest in it. So I'll usually go high level and talk about, if you breathe in through your nose, you can get increased oxygen creation in your body, which means that goes to your muscles, which limits the lactic acid buildup in your body, and you can be more efficient. Like I keep it to be like that simple. And if they are curious, I can go into more details about CO2 and all of those other pieces. But I think some people get scared by the science sometimes, and sometimes they just need it very point blank, like here's what it could give you. Take it or leave it. If you want to try it, I'm happy to help. But I kind of leave it at that. And it's definitely becoming a lot more interesting. Some people are saying like I can't do it. And that's probably the biggest answer that I get is I can't. Like my nose this, my nose that. So I really want to try to break some of those myths up. Now, obviously, I just got my ultra coaching certification as well too. I've been coaching a few friends on and off, but I got a little bit of a certification now with USCA, the States, and then working in the oxygen advantage into that is my plan. So it'll be really interesting to see what those kind of crossovers are and how more people gravitate towards it. Because when I keep it simple, it seems like people are a lot more interested. And when they're interested, after a while, then they start asking more questions.
There's a lot of thoughts coming into my mind. I'm even just thinking about in terms of people don't understand, yeah, the benefits of it. Like if you're doing a 300-mile race, how frequently are the water stops? Because running, I was in Santa Monica, by the way, that date, the 29th of
Oh,
March.
okay. Oh, okay.
But I was working. I was there in terms of being at an event, so I wasn't able to pull away from it. And there was a camera crew would also come in. But yeah, it was relatively hot. It wasn't cold. And if you're running a long distance like that, especially, I would imagine most of the other runners were mouth breathing during it, they're going to suffer from dehydration more likely. Is there a benefit? Have you seen a benefit there? I'm just trying to think of all of the benefits that you've listed. Probably, what is the biggest one? You talked about cramps. You don't have them. You talked about reduced heart rate. You talked about before you were running and you had almost trauma to the throat as a result of the dry air that was coming in which in turn is going to cause narrowing of the airways and make breathing more difficult. So, is there other aspects that you think that we are missing here in terms of the ultra running world? Dehydration, is that a factor?
I think there's definitely a factor for the dehydration, just obviously the membranes in your mouth getting drier, whereas obviously your nose is meant to filter. Which I mean, I'll give the example. I was supposed to race Tahoe 200 last week, and I ended up pulling out just with all the stuff I've done this year is too much mileage, and my body wasn't ready. But I ended up volunteering and sweeping. So sweeping basically means following the last runners, taking them flaggings down, and just helping those runners along. And what I noticed with all those runners is like chapped lips, dry mouth. And the big one in the Tahoe area, for those that aren't familiar with it, is granite dust. So the rock around that area, it when it kind of on the trails, it's all like this like powdery granite dust. And then everybody's running and kicking that up. It gets in the air. You can actually see it with your headlamp. And the number of people that were finishing the race that had like no voice, like they were quite literally zero voice, could barely talk, hacking, coughing, some people coughing up blood. It's interesting to see that versus some of the people that finished and had zero symptoms whatsoever. Now, some people had buffs over their mouth and their nose, and but I was noticing when I was running because I was, sweeping. I wasn't running as fast, so I could nose breathe basically the entire time. I had zero issues for the entire like almost 30 hours that I was out on that course during the week, helping with volunteering and sweeping. So it's very interesting seeing that aspect of it. So I think the filtering aspect of, again, not taking all those contaminants right into your lungs, letting your nose do its job to filter things out. That's another, I think, huge benefit that people underestimate. Again, your nose humidifies the air, so now you're not getting dry air into your lungs. There's just, I mean, there's so many different functions that I don't think people truly understand why, it's not just about performance, it's about everything. And that's why we talked about the heart rate, we talked about the cramping, we talked about the lactic acid buildup. There's just so many things that pile up that add up to like, why wouldn't you try it or put the work in, the consistency and the effort in to at least see if it works for you. I'm not saying it's going to work for everybody. I don't want to, sit here and be like, oh, this is the, magic pill for everyone. Um, but I can only speak to my experience and the people that I've helped coach with it a little bit and seeing them and their ability to manage things on their side, which has been incredible to watch as well too.
I will say that it's applicable for everybody based on my own experience of working with, the hundreds and thousands of clients that I had. A lot of them did come in with issues. They come in with mental health problems, respiratory conditions, sleep issues, and then of course the athletic side of it. We all have a similar physiology to a greater or lesser degree, and our nose performs something that our mouth doesn't. I understand it may not be for everybody, but has it ever come into your mind what might it take or whether a shift might take place in running that nose breathing will actually start? What's it going to take just for that tipping point that people become aware of it? Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for example, we talked about Ihor before. I mean, when you see the performances, I mean, he's just an exceptional athlete. And when you see performances that he's doing, and yes, there are people alongside him that are doing equally strong performances. But when you see how he's able to recover from these events, and I think that's another kind of unkept secret is the ability to recover faster through this because you're not depleting your system. You're giving your system so much more than what you are when you're mouth breathing. And when we talked about what do I say to my peers? My line that I like to use is your mouth hole is not a breath hole. And it might catch some people off guard, but it's true. That's not its function. I mean, we use it as that because I'll be honest, like we get lazy, and that's it's lazy breathing. That's the way that I like to describe it. It's not because you don't know any better. It's because you just haven't been taught any different because they don't teach it. I mean, I have two girls, age 6 and 9, and I mean, could they teach breathing in school? Sure. Like that, is there a way to, factor this in? I've slowly kind of help my girls with that as well too. When they're not regulated, it's, don't take a deep breath. It's like, I just want you to like match my breathing. And We're going to go in through the nose as slow as we can and out through the nose as slow as we can. And it's amazing doing that versus the deep breathing aspect and how quickly people come into regulation with that. So I think one, it's, athletes talking about it more. Not that I want to give away all my secrets for performance, but it's definitely something that's helped me immensely in the races that I'm doing and the stuff that I'm doing now with these longer distance events. I think that's a huge thing is people talking about it and seeing the examples of people doing it. And again, like having instructors that are knowledgeable in it, me having my own personal experience, plus getting the certification on top of it and being able to speak to it from that side versus me just coming in, getting a certification going like, I'm going to teach you how to breathe when you're running. It comes from a very different place because there's that level of experience that you have associated with it. So I think that's another one is seeing more running coaches and people in that, even in the endurance world, whether it be Ironman or swimming, any of those things. I mean, I think there's opportunity for coaches to have this added certification on top of what they're doing to really kind of, hack people's performance because what else is left? I mean, you look at all of these Norwegian triathletes and everything that they're doing with them, and they're testing their lactate thresholds every hour on with blood work, and like at what point, like what else is there left from a like science perspective to do to hack the body for performance? Well, you have your breath sitting right there. Like it's something that's literally sitting right there, right in front of you all the time, and you're not doing anything with it. And I'm proof that Ihor is proof. My coach, everybody that's using it, there's proof there that it's working for so many people. That I think it's just not out there enough yet. Maybe more, again, conversations like this that you've had with Ihor and I, and putting it out there into the world that it'll, push people towards it.
I think it's going to happen. Sometimes I think it's the simplicity of it that holds it back. And just the point that you said, you have it there. And that was a really good point as well. Where do you go in terms of getting the body to make performance increments? Because now we're talking about marginal improvements, but the breadth has been totally untapped. Nobody has looked into it, or very, very few people. Few researchers are now to start looking into it. George Dallin, he's from Colorado State University, and he trains and works with a lot of triathletes at an international level in the United States. And he has written a few papers on it. And there are some others, but very few and far between, given all of the sports scientists in the world. It's pretty amazing. Do you know, I think there's another avenue here as well, Evan, because you were running as a means of helping with your mental health. And now with running with nose breathing, you're going to have a reduced chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide, which will translate into lighter and slower breathing in your normal everyday, but also a better recruitment of your diaphragm, which will too help with mental health. And also the recovery, because that's going to feed into the balance of the autonomic nervous system. So there's quite a number of different inroads to it. Yeah, in terms of our conversation, do you have any final words? Is there anything that we've forgotten about?
I think the unique thing is, like I said, when I come at it from two completely opposite sides of things, like performance versus the therapeutic side of things, I think it's just proof that like you talked about, that it's for everybody. I don't think there's anything that it can't like help with if you're open to it and willing to accept that aspect. And I think, finding the breath work and all those pieces. And really for me, it was a matter of, I was running from avoidance and distraction, which a lot of people, I won't say a lot of people, but some people gravitate towards because it's, you get those same dopamine hits, you get those same endorphins that you would get from whatever the addiction would have been, or gambling, whatever it is. But I think the unique thing for me is I actually had to make a decision and change why I was running to figure out if I actually wanted to keep running, because I could no longer run from an avoidance and distraction piece because I was doing all this work from healing and therapy and all these other pieces. And I'm a firm believer that, running is complementary to therapy. Therapy is complementary to running. I don't think you can do one without the other, because running will deal with the symptoms that are like coming up. Oh, I need to go for a run because I'm stressed. Okay, you might get a little bit of a hit, but what happens when that dopamine's gone again? So therapy really deals with the why aspect. And then the breath work are the tools that allow you to function every day when you're in between those two things. So I had to come at running from a really different perspective and coming at it from now a place of like love, self-compassion, pushing my edges, seeing what my limits are, not from a matter of like racing people or doing anything like that. And I think again, breath work just allows me to be present and centered and there. Like you cannot be there if you focus on your breathing. So I think that's kind of what my uh, I guess the piece that I would leave with.
So now that you have your certification in ultra running and you're going to be a running coach and you will have your certification in oxygen advantage, well, now people will want to reach out to you because they will want to learn from you in terms of how to improve their running and bring all of this into their running. Do you have a social media set up or anything like that?
Yeah, so everything is through my Instagram, so just at Ultra Birch. So everything's through there, and then I have a website that's just going through a little bit of work right now to get my coaching stuff up. So it'll be just ultrabirch.com. Super easy, everything's the same, and that's where you'll find me on those two platforms. And yeah, I'm excited to be able to integrate the two together and really see other athletes gravitate towards this and see what their potential is and what they haven't tapped into. So I think there's lots of opportunity there in that realm. So, and whether or not that be just the breath work or just the running coaching, whatever that may be, but I think the two are going to go really well hand in hand. And as you say, I think it's at the precipice right now of really coming into it, hearing so many more people talking about it, whether it be, celebrities, whatever you want to call it. And I think that might be the next big push is, what is that next thing that people are moving towards? And I hope it's not this, thing that ends up being fly by night that people are just like gravitate towards. And I think it's going to be one of these things that people are going to latch onto and be like, why, like, what have we missed for the last long period of time here? Because I mean, I wish I was doing this 10 years ago, 20 years ago when I started in my career. Like, I always joke that if you walked into a dispatch center and you saw everybody doing breath work before they took a call, how different would those situations be? That's something for me to look down the road with breath work into and see if there's something in the first responder community that could benefit from it as well too from mental health side. But yeah, so many doors that could be opened. Again, got to focus your energy and attention somewhere. So we'll see where it takes me.
Yeah, and I think it's very important, given that you have an experience in a specific background, because you bring a degree of credibility then to it. And even with first responders, it's not just about the mental health, but it's being more in terms of if one is overly stressed as a human being, we're more likely to make mistakes. And we don't want to be making mistakes in that situation. There's already enough pressure on those individuals to do well. So it's really about, I suppose, reaching their full potential so they can do the best that they can do in that situation. Coming back to your social media feed, so it's Ultra Birch. That's Ultra BIRCH. That's your
Yeah,
Instagram
that's
and
right. Yeah.
.com as well. Okay.
Yes, correct.
So for anybody wanting to reach out to you, please reach out to Evan and let's get nose breathing into running and the wider field, as Evan was talking about, in terms of your everyday breathing, in terms of sleep, and in terms of using breathing both for improving sports performance, but also mental health. Evan, it was a pleasure. Last word with you.
Yeah, I just want to say we recorded this on National PTSD Awareness Day, which neither of us, I didn't know until today, which is pretty incredible. And yeah, I thank you for your time, Patrick. I mean, I hope to do it again with you at a later date. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the evolution of this is within running. So I'm excited to see and be a part of it.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Evan.